There we go, fantastic. So this event is really important to me and important to my, to our beliefs of why we're doing all of our flexible working ambassador work in our schools and our trusts and within our region. It's really about that driving equality part of it. It's so important to us that actually we destigmatise flexible working as the preserve of women with babies and, stigmatise women in that way, and to really redress that balance. In a parliamentary paper, it talks about how we need to make sure that flexible working is the norm in a way so that we can make sure that all people are, supported, that there is no barriers to flexible progression, that there's no gender pay gap, which we know is such a, scourge, of our, our existence within schools. So this is a really important event for me, especially for people who are thinking about their careers and wanting to progress flexibly. So I'm absolutely delighted that Lindsay's here from Flexible Teacher Talent. Lindsay and Lucy helped us on our journey right at the beginning in terms of flexible working for our schools, and they are an absolute mine of all kinds of information, about this. So I really hope that you get as much as you possibly can from today's session. Lindsay's got such great work, that she's doing, nationally on this piece. So you're in very, very good hands. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to you, Lindsay. Thank you very much for leading today's session.
Thanks, that was a very kind introduction. So I'm going to come back to this in a minute because we're a bit of a smaller group. I'm going to run it slightly differently, and Antonia kind of alluded to this, but at the end we can pause the recording and we can talk about your individual situations if that would be helpful for anyone. So I might ask you about that again later on. I'm Lindsay Patience, so I'm one half of Flexible Teacher Talent, and Lucy and I started Flexible Teacher Talent because we were both assistant heads working in big London secondary schools, and after we had our children, we just found that life was not compatible with working full-time in schools for us. So I actually left my school, I left my senior leadership role and moved to just a part-time teacher role in another school after I had my daughter. And Lucy went the other way, and she stayed on after she had her first child. Having asked to go down to 4 days, was told she could do that for one term and then had to go back up to full-time. And one term of doing full-time was enough for her to know that she didn't want to do that anymore, and she left as well, and she again had a break from teaching. So we're very conscious that we do fall into that statistic of the group of women between 30 and 39 who leave the education sector every year. And we were both we didn't know each other at that time, and we were very kind of individually upset about the situation where we were losing talent from schools. So Teach First used to run something called the innovation program, where you could take them a problem and they would help you to kind of workshop a way to solve that and set up what needed to be in place to make that situation better. So I went to that looking at how to keep women in that age group in teaching, and Lucy came into it with a view to try and get women to go back after maternity leave into the same level of seniority so that they weren't having to step down after they had children. And working together on those problems, what we found was that flexible working might be a solution to both of these things. And so we set up Flexible Teacher Talent with Teach First's help. And what we very, very soon saw was it wasn't just women. Like, I do think this is a women's issue, and this is something that massively impacts the gender pay imbalance in our sector. But flexible working is beneficial for many different groups, and also for the schools themselves and for the pupils in those schools, because of its benefits for retention and recruitment and diversity. But I hope that you are an audience who are already convinced of those things. So I'm not going to kind of go on too much this evening about the benefits, but I will be talking about the benefits because when you're applying for flexible working in a leadership role, I think it's something that's really important, is to show the school the benefits above and beyond the benefits for you and your situation, the benefits for the school community of you being able to work flexibly. And I think part of the problem is that when we make these requests for flexible working in leadership positions in school, they often come at a time where people are very vulnerable. So they're coming at a time when people feel like they have to move to part-time for some reason, or that they've got commitments that are kind of impeding on them being able to work full-time. So that might be parenting, it might be caring, it might be a health issue, it might just be, you know, a change in the view of what you want from your life. And often those are quite turbulent times that make you quite vulnerable. So it's in the work that we do supporting schools to introduce flexible working, and in the work that we do with helping individuals to secure flexible working, we're often working with people who are not in the best kind of place and are really worried about making that request for flexible working. Anyway, I'm banging on a bit, I apologise for that. So this evening session, I just want to have a look at some of the challenges around career progression and flexible working. So Lucy and I don't like to kind of celebrate the problem, but I think it is important to look at why we have such an issue around flexible working and leadership in schools and in the education sector. It's a really big contributing factor to that gender pay gap. And I don't know if anyone is on Teacher Tap, but there was a great question last Tuesday on my birthday, about whether you would allow head teachers, senior leaders and teachers to work from home, so if they could have a regular day working from home. And it's a really interesting results set, because it's 50-50. So half of the people think, yeah, that's fine, let them have a day from working from home, that'll be fine, and half people are dead against it. And there's a really interesting analysis in their blog today, which I need to read further and do a bit more analysis on, but it says that, you know, people and there's kind of an effect where you don't want your colleagues to benefit from things that you don't benefit from. And I think that's something that we do see in terms of the kind of glass ceiling and the access to flexible working, because lots of people think, well, no, I got to this position without being able to work flexibly, so, you know, why can't you do it? And that's sometimes a problem for the kind of culture of schools and how head teachers view flexible working. And given that the gatekeepers to flexible working, you know, often have been working in schools for a long time, and situations were quite different, and flexible working wasn't as common before as it was. I mean, even now, so my eldest daughter is 5 now, and in those 5 years from when I had her and couldn't find flexible working to now, the landscape is completely different, and part of that is because of trusts like Pioneer and Antonia actually, and her job share situation, and her filtering that down through the organisation, but also leading on this flexible working ambassador schools. We are seeing benefits for schools, and we are seeing more and more people in these roles, and that is helping us to see that this can work and it should work. So I'm going to talk very briefly about that. I'm going to go really technical and specific on TLRs and how they work with flexible working. This is like my pet peeve, so more on that later. And then talk about the benefits, just framed as why it's really important that you can still progress your career at the same time as working flexibly. And then we can have a look at kind of ways to request flexible working if you're already in a senior leadership position or a middle leadership position, and then also ways to find a new job or a promoted post elsewhere with flexible working. Because quite often the people that we work with at Flexible Teacher Talent, the individuals, have come to us because they've made a request for flexible working and been told they can't have it. And the sort of options that we give are to challenge that and try and appeal it, or to leave and to find something else. So we do a lot of work with both groups of people, so people who are in post already and looking for flexible working, and people who are trying to find a new promoted post. And then just a final little bit, depending on where you are as a group and what your circumstances are, but I'd really like to look at how to feel comfortable in your flexible leadership post, because I think that's something that doesn't get enough focus. So we look a lot about trying to get people into the posts, and then once they're there, they can often be left feeling unconfident and kind of undeveloped in those posts. So just wanted to talk about that really quickly, but we'll change that based on kind of where you guys are and your situations. I can talk about it more generally, or we can pause at that point and look at your individual situations. So this is just a little bit on why we started Flexible Teacher Talent. Lots of issues in the education sector around leadership diversity, around retention. So we're just losing just the phrase we used in our initial pitch for Teach First was about hemorrhaging women from the profession, and that is still the case. We lose more than 6,000 teachers a year from that demographic of women aged 30 to 39, and yes, that is the biggest group in teaching anyway, just demographically, but it's such a huge number of people that are leaving, and there are concerns about early career teachers leaving and leaving within the first 5 years, but that's almost not comparable. If you think about people who are leaving in the demographic of women aged 30 to 39 and the experience that they have and how effective they are, that's such a big loss to schools in terms of what's going from them, because they can't facilitate flexible working. We do a lot of work with the maternity teacher, paternity teacher project around looking at ways to support people on parental leave. Flexible working isn't just for women and it isn't just for mothers, but it is a huge impact on that group. So we talk about that group quite a lot. But the other thing not to lose sight of is this idea about impact on the pupils. So if you can keep good people in your schools, if you can keep effective teachers in front of your children in those schools, they are going to have better outcomes. And if flexible working is a way to keep people in the classroom, it's so important that first of all people are allowed to do that, and also that people lower down the school are seeing people higher up the school in those positions and being able to aspire to that and know that they can still progress while they work flexibly. And I think we are getting there. I think the landscape is changing for the better. You know, if I'd been doing this 5 years ago, I don't think we would have had a separate session about requesting flexible working for progression. I think that was completely off the table. There's a statistic from 2016 from, I think it's the NAHT, it's one of the big unions, and they found from their members that 100% of flexible working requests in leadership positions were turned down in that year. So we are way beyond that, but there's still quite a lot of room for improvement. So flexible working is obviously quite a big hot topic in the education sector. This session and this Flexible Working Ambassador Schools programme has been set up as part of the Department for Education's commitment to improving recruitment and retention, and flexible working is a big element of that. So Lucy and I sit on the advisory board and the steering group for flexible working at the DFE, and have been working with lots of the different flexible working ambassador schools to help with the delivery of this. There's also some great work going on with TimeWise that's training for more general groups. So they do training for governors, they do training for head teachers, and there's another one, I can't remember what the other one is, but they do separate training pieces. And TimeWise are an organisation that work on flexible working across different sectors. So they bring a real expertise and lots of experience about flexible working more generally. And then the schools and organisations like ours bring the education sector specific expertise that we've developed over the past few years working in this area. So Flexible Teacher Talent is an organisation that helps schools to introduce flexible working, but most of my time, Lucy focuses a lot on the school aspects, but most of my time is spent helping individuals who want to work flexibly in school. And so that's where my kind of expertise is coming from in delivering this session. What I'm about to now is completely cringy, because there is a link in this slide to an article that I wrote for the Chartered College of Teaching Impact magazine. That's so immodest, I can't believe it. But the article was a piece in the career progression, what's the word I'm looking for? Not episode, version of that magazine. So the theme for the magazine was all about career progression, and I was asked to write something about how flexible working fits in with that, and the title of the piece is called A Raw Deal for Part-Time Teachers. So it's all about how difficult it is, really, so how we are preventing people from working flexibly in senior leadership positions. And all of these next few slides are from that piece about why it is difficult to work in schools flexibly in senior positions. So the first thing really is that people are scared to ask. So people see it as something that's quite damaging for their career prospects. There was some really interesting, I don't work for Teacher Tab, I don't know why I'm talking about them so much, but Teacher Tab did a really good piece of data around how people felt requesting flexible working would affect their career prospects. And a key fact that came out of that was that men feared that it would affect their progression more than women. And that was quite interesting to me, I thought, because I would have thought everyone would have thought it was the same, but to see that men kind of in society find working flexibly more damaging to their careers, I thought was something that was quite interesting. So we have this issue around people thinking that if they ask for flexible working, they won't be given it, and that it will damage their career prospects. I did a little bit of research just on Twitter, just a Twitter survey about how requests have changed over time. So it does show a positive picture. It does show that people are more likely to make the request, but we still have quite a high, nearly a quarter of people don't even bother making flexible working requests because they're so sure that they'll be rejected. And that, that's quite a sad situation to be in, to be so sure that the culture in our school is such that there's no point in even asking, because you definitely won't get it. I think that's something that's, the NFER research has shown that the biggest decision and the biggest factor in whether a school offers flexible working or not is the attitude of the head teacher. But how that pervades the whole culture of a school, I think, is something that makes it really hard for people working in a school that is like that to ever imagine being able to work flexibly. And because of that, the data on percentage of flexible working requests that are accepted is actually quite misleading, because it only shows the people who were confident enough to make the request in the first place. It doesn't show all the people who want to work flexibly but haven't been allowed to. And this Cooper-Gibson research that the DFE commissioned, which is a really big data set, the links to all these studies are at the end as well, that showed that nearly a third of their school leaders that they interviewed, and they interviewed over 1,000, had declined flexible working requests. So it is quite common to be turned down. It is quite common to make the request and to not be able to have the school tell you that they can't accommodate that. And I think my personal experience is a bit skewed on that, because obviously we work with lots of people who are coming to us saying, oh, my head won't give me this flexible working request, what can I do? So I think sometimes I have a bit of a less rosy view, because if someone requests flexible working and gets it, they don't darken my door, they don't worry about it. So I think it's hard for me to get this in perspective maybe, but it seems to me like lots of leaders are turned down, lots of leaders don't request it, and the situation is positive but still quite difficult. And particularly if you're at a school, and there are schools unfortunately where it just is impossible. The head teacher's view and the senior leadership team view is that you cannot work flexibly in a promoted post. And that, that kind of view is something that's come out in that teacher tap research today. So some people just think that working in a senior role in a school or as a teacher is just not compatible with flexible working. And I think, so when I talk about what I do in flexible teacher talent with non-teachers and people not in the education sector, they often say, well, of course you can't work flexibly when you're a teacher. You need to be in the classroom and you need to be in front of the children. And I think it's really important to remember that flexible working doesn't mean what it means in other sectors. It doesn't mean, having flexi time and just deciding one day that you're going to leave early and come in late the next day. Or you will always have that contact time, that face-to-face time where you have to be in school. And so the opportunities for flexibility might be reduced, but it is still possible, and there are ways to make flexible working work in schools. And we've got this growing database of case studies that evidence that it can work, and the different ways that it can work. But it's almost because it's more difficult, because we're a very client-facing industry, we should make even more effort to find creative ways to deliver this. And I think that's especially true at the moment in the current climate, where other sectors, we're already behind other sectors in terms of flexibility, and after COVID, other sectors are making leaps and bounds in terms of flexible working and hybrid working and more working from home. We can't necessarily do that to the same scale in teaching, but if we stop and stay where we are while other sectors are becoming more flexible, then that gap between us and other sectors is getting even bigger, and that creates lots of problems in terms of recruitment and retention and career changes. So we do some work with Now Teach as well. So Now Teach is a training program for career changers who want to go into teaching, and during their training program they're only 4 days a week. They work 4 days a week throughout the training program, and then many of them go into school working flexibly, so either working part-time or some of the flexible arrangement. And that's because the industries that they've come from have much greater flexibility. And Katie Waldegrave, who's the founder of Now Teach, talks about how they're often really shocked. So people from other sectors think that teaching is a really great profession for people who want flexibility, people who've got children, who want time off with their own children in the school holidays, who, you know, want to finish early at 3:30. But I think as a working parent in the education sector, it's really become clear to me that, you know, I have to be at school if I had to be at school before school starts and after school finishes. I don't get to have any time with my own children doing drop off and pick up, which might be something that drives people's own desire to work flexibly. So the numbers who want to work flexibly in the sector are growing and continue to grow, and I think we would just see that more and more when compared with other sectors. I think that's something we need to be really careful of as a sector in terms of recruitment and retention, but also just in terms of how we treat people and how people live. You know, COVID has shown many of us that, you know, time is precious and it's important to enjoy your life and get the most out of your lives. And I think we are seeing lots of people requesting flexible working now for reasons other than parenting. So because they just want to make the most of the time that they have. I think it's on this next slide, but I'll talk about it now. Timewise have also done a big piece of research about flexible working more generally, and find that over 90% of millennials, or young millennials, now want to work flexibly because they want to have kind of portfolio careers and careers where they call them slashies. I love this term. So where you're a teacher slash photographer, or you're a teacher slash artist. So you spend some of the week doing one thing and some of the week doing something else. And that's much more common now than it would have been in the past. And if we don't offer that as an option, if we don't let teacher be part of the slashy career field, then we are going to lose people, and we're going to lose good people. If you think as well about the type of people that we have in schools and how you are as a teacher, I mean, we've got a music teacher at school who he works 3 days a week because he's a professional musician the rest of the time. So what he brings to the classroom is so important. And if all of our teachers and all of our school leaders are full-time, we are limiting the diversity in who we have in our classrooms. And actually people who are working flexibly can often bring a great deal into the classroom and into the school community. So if you're making a business case to your school about why it's important to give you flexible working, that's not just because of your situation and how it will keep you and the value of retaining you. It's also about the value of offering flexible working across the school to others and setting an example that flexible working can work, because it increases your retention, your recruitment, but also that diversity. If schools are run by one type of people and all teachers are the same type of person, the group of people that can work full-time or that want to work full-time, then there isn't that diversity. It's great to have those people there, you need those people there to have schools running, but you're missing out on so much if you only have those people. I'm sorry if my voice is going. Both of my children have had tonsillitis, so I suspect that I have it. So I'm just going to do a little TLR thing here about my TLR issue. So I don't know if any of you have any experience of this, but the TLR situation, if you have a teaching and learning responsibility, the school teacher's paying conditions document says if you have a TLR 1 or 2, so the top TLRs, so we're looking here at things like head of year or head of department, significant responsibilities in middle leadership roles. Often if you're senior leadership, you get moved onto a management scale. So really this is affecting top end of middle leadership, or maybe senior leadership, depending on the school and the size of the school. But what the school teachers pay and conditions document says, and this governs all maintained schools, so some academies might not have to stick to this, they might have their own arrangements, but the majority of academies and free schools went with the school teachers pay and conditions document as their kind of guide for HR when they academized. So lots of schools that aren't maintained schools still have this school teachers pay and conditions document regulations to adhere to. And what it says is if you've got TLR 1 or 2, you have to be paid pro rata. So if you are part-time in a TLR role, you have to be paid 0.6 of that TLR money. So if you get paid an extra £9,000 for doing your role and you're 0.5 as a timetable, you can only be paid half of that TLR. And that is absolutely fine and completely fair, so long as you are also only doing half of the role. And actually what we're seeing in practice is that it's really difficult to be a part-time TLR holder because you are often paid partially and in school partially, but you are expected to do the full role. And there's so much wrong with that. There's so much wrong with that in terms of fairness and in terms of who is doing that, because let's face it, most of the people who are on part-time TLRs are women. And so there's a kind of indirect sex discrimination issue, I think, there. And I feel very passionate about that. But there's also the problem that, you know, it doesn't work. You can't do a full role in not enough time and with not enough pay. So you're almost setting people up to fail. And it looks like flexible working doesn't work in middle leadership positions. It doesn't work for TLR roles because people are being asked to do things that they're not paid for, that they don't have time for. And some of the other issues around that is just that schools often say, you know, this is too hard, we can't do this, we can't work out what 0.6 of this role is to divvy up the responsibilities, or, you know, it's too much effort, it's too hard to work out how to do this job share split for these responsibilities. And that's why we see this position where lots of schools say, you know, you cannot do a TLR flexibly. We are not allowed to work flexibly if you are a TLR 1 or 2 holder. Now that's actually wrong. That's actually legally wrong. You're not allowed to say that because it discriminates against flexible workers, and every flexible working request has to be judged on its own merits. So where we see schools with these blanket bans on working flexibly in certain roles, that's actually not okay. That can be challenged through your union or through an employment tribunal if it gets to that stage. But every single flexible working request must legally be looked at by the school so that they can assess it on its own merits. It's not okay to say no one at this level can work flexibly. And, you know, schools don't know that, because if you think about the people who are in charge of schools and who are in charge of HR in schools, they are often not specialists. You know, they're very, very good teachers, they're very, very good educational leaders. They don't often have that level of kind of HR and legal knowledge to do this. And I think that's why the work that TimeWise have been doing is so important for the sector, because they know about job redesign and the legalities that surround flexible working. So they have this great overview from other sectors that shows us how it can be done and how it should be done. Yes, so that's a big problem with this, but there are ways to sort it out. So you don't have to just make people work the full TLR for half the money or not give TLRs to part-time people, because there are ways to alter their pay. You can top it up with the TLR 3, which interestingly does not need to be prorated. So you can give them a TLR 1 plus a TLR 3 to top up the money from the pro rata amount, or you can change them onto the management scale and just adjust it so that they get paid appropriately for the level of responsibility that they do, or you can prorata the responsibilities. So if you are working currently in a TLR position flexibly or part-time in this situation, and you find that your responsibilities don't match your pay, Flexible Teacher Talent can help you with that, or, you know, speak to your union about how that can be prorated, how that can be not prorated, how that can be dealt with, how you can make sure that you're getting paid appropriately for the work that you do, because it's not just about you as an individual and what's fair for you. That's important, and you should be not working for free, but it's also about setting the tone in the whole organization that, you know, flexible working can work at TLR level if it's done properly, and that might take a lot of effort and it might be hard the first time that it's done. But as with everything that we see in flexible working in schools, the first time is always the hardest. So if you are working already flexibly as a leader in a school, you are doing all the hard work for people who come after you, because every time you make that challenge, every time you make that request, every time you get something clarified about how things should work, you are making it easier for the next people who come in your position and don't have to fight that fight. And I'm sure there will be other fights that they have to fight. And that's really hard. You know, it's really difficult to be a pioneer, to be a kind of trailblazer in this area, because often you're coming off a time where you've just had a baby, or you have additional caring responsibilities, or you've had a health problem. So to have to kind of fight those battles and push ahead in that way can sometimes be quite difficult, particularly if you don't feel confident in the role, and you feel really lucky. So we see this a lot as well. So people who are given flexible leadership roles feel really lucky to have that, and we hear that rhetoric all the time about, you know, I'm really lucky. Well, no, you know what, the school are really lucky to have you, the school are really lucky to retain you, and they're really lucky to see to be able to showcase how well flexible working can work for recruitment and retention and diversity. I'm sorry, that's my little TLR rant over. I do go on about TLRs. We've written to the DfE and to the Secretary of State to say that we think the TLR situation is unfair and that it needs addressing. So Women Ed, the NEU and Flexible Teacher Talent have written a joint letter, and they have said they will consider it in a very civil service kind of way. So moving on. Oh, that was a lot of moaning, considering I said I don't celebrate the problem. It's really hard to work flexibly in a leadership role. It's not impossible, and it can work. Why it is important that it works is this whole issue around diversity and gender equality, and making sure that we are opening up our senior positions in schools to all groups. So it's not just men that are progressing through the organisation. And this is important for gender pay gaps as well, but I have this whole other issue around how important it is for role modelling for our children. So schools are the first organisations that children come into contact with, that they spend a lot of time with. And if they see that the only way to progress, that their head teachers, that their senior leaders in their school are all male, or are all full-time, or do not have children, or do not have disabilities or health issues, then that sends a very powerful message to them from a really young age that the only way you can progress is if you are a certain type of person and you are able to work full time. And that is something that we really need to consider in terms of the impact that that's having on society and on, you know, the future of our society. Oh, sorry, I am really on a rant now, aren't I? But these figures are from the article that I just got them straight from the school workforce survey, and it shows the proportion of, it's a bit of a weird proportion, but the proportion of part-time staff as a percentage of the total full-time equivalent. So how many heads, deputy heads, assistant heads and teachers work part-time in the different sectors, and you can see it changes a little bit between different types of schools, and there are lots of contextual issues. You know, sometimes in certain settings it's harder or it's easier to work flexibly or not, but if you look at that figure for all schools, it's still a really, really low proportion of people that are working part-time in schools. And when you look at the figures compared to the rest of the country, it's quite stark, really. So, you know, most teachers are female. Only 28% of teachers who are female work part-time. It's 40% in the whole of the UK, and it's the same again for men, maybe on a slightly smaller scale, but 12% of men nationally work part-time, and that's only 8% in the teaching profession. And some people have suggested that might be because, you know, we're a bit part-time anyway because of the school holidays, but you know, I think we can all appreciate that those, you know, those school holidays are part, we get paid for the school year, and you know, I certainly find my time off in school holidays is not like time off. So moving on. And the other important thing to think about of why it's important that we allow flexibility in terms of leaders is because who are you losing? Like who is going from your schools because they can't access flexible working? We have a book out in April. Here I go again, showing off. And one of the case studies in that is a lady called Sharish Osman, who is an MTPT project ambassador, and she requested flexible working in her she's like a lead teacher, but she also does a lot of early career teacher development. And she requested flexible working after she had her second child and had it turned down. And they said, you can come back, but you can only be an English teacher. You can't have your role. And she said, she thought about it for a bit. She was really unhappy about it, but she said, okay, fine, I'll give up my leadership roles and I'll just come back as an English teacher. And one of the deputy heads heard about this and phoned her back immediately and said, you must be joking, we can't lose you and all of your experience. Of course you can still do your role and work part-time. And the request was granted because he realized, you know, he wasn't just losing her. This isn't about just losing people physically from the school. Yes, people often leave if they don't get their flexible working request, but you're also losing their expertise. If they step down from head of department roles, if they step down from phase leader roles, that you lose that expertise, and you also lose a certain element of goodwill. You know, people don't request flexible working unless they need it, if they really want it. And if you're telling people no, that's really hard to continue in that relationship and in that setup in school. And we certainly work with a lot of people who, you know, they take it really personally when their flexible working request is turned down, because they feel that if they were really valued by their school, then their school would try and accommodate that request, or at least kind of meet them somewhere in the middle or offer them some kind of compromise. So often when people get a flat no about their flexible working request, they find that really hard to deal with. It's really hard to not take personally, because it is something very personal, and it's very hard to put yourself out there and ask for that, and then be told that you can't have it. And some people that, you know, some SLT members that we've been working with or negotiating with have said, no, it's because we do value them, you know, we want to keep them full time, we can't lose them. And that's, you know, okay, good argument maybe. But if you're keeping someone full time who doesn't want to be there full time, rather than allowing them to have the flexibility that they've requested, whether that's late starts or part time or PPA from home, you know, think about for school leaders, what's the loss there in terms of the goodwill and the extra kind of commitment and motivation from people that you're losing. And why this is also important for leadership roles is because it models lower down the school about whether you're allowed to request flexibility and whether flexible working requests will be accepted. So if leaders are given it, then people lower down the school can see that they might be able to do that as well, and also that they might be able to progress. So we often hear about that described as the floodgates, and like how awful it would be if you grant a few flexible working requests and everybody wants to work flexibly. But actually, when we work with schools, we encourage them to do what we call this sort of full flex program, where every year you ask everyone in the school, what do you want? What do you want in terms of flexibility? And the school leaders that do that are really surprised by how little people want. It's 1 day a week to drop someone off at school. It's one early finish a week so that you can see a parent in a nursing home, or it's, you know, every other Friday off when you have your PPA so that you can go on mini breaks, whatever it is. Those things are huge for those individuals, but actually really quite small for the school. And so schools that are open to flexible working and will have those discussions with their staff often find it's very easy for them to accommodate things that make a very big difference to individuals. Schools that are just completely closed to it miss those opportunities and effectively lose the goodwill of their staff. So the other reason why it's important is why it's part of the DfE's strategy at the moment, is because of recruitment and retention. You really limit your pool of applicants for roles if you don't offer flexible working. So this is really hard for you to do anything about as someone who is requesting flexible working. But when in terms of describing what the benefits are of giving you flexible working, the overall benefits for the school of better retention and better recruitment are really important. And there's that statistic from TimeWise about how younger workers want to work flexibly. That's something that's important to them. If we want to recruit the best people into our schools, we will need to offer some more flexibility. Gender pay gap, I don't know if you've seen that recent report from Women Ed and again one of the other unions, I don't know why I can never remember the name of the right union, but they have done some work around the gender pay gap in the education sector. It's the worst now in all industries, so the gender pay gap in education is even worse than the gender pay gap in the finance sector, which has been, they've been 1 and 2 for a number of years, and now education is the worst. Yay, we're winning. And I think there's a huge diversity issue if we are not seeing, you know, people working flexibly in senior positions, because of what it means for who can progress. And you can't be what you can't see. And if you don't see that in terms of accessing senior roles and remaining in promoted posts, even when you want to or need to work flexibly, that's a really important issue for diversity. And we work with lots of schools who claim to have this very inclusive, very committed ethos in terms of diversity. And then you look at their staff teams and you look at their attitude towards flexible working in their staff teams, and you realise that actually you're not being true to your values as a school. We also really positively work with lots of multi-academy trusts and with lots of individual schools who are very committed to diversity, and as part of that have realised that they need to change their approach to flexible working if they want to evidence that diversity and to improve the diversity and inclusion in their staff teams. And that does have a knock-on effect with your students as well, and what they see and what they can aspire to in the future. And that might be something that seems a bit long-term and kind of abstract. I think it's really important that we show children that you can progress if you're a mother, if you are disabled, if you have a health issue. Because we can't, it's really hard because we can't change society. We can't change the fact that women are more likely to have caring responsibilities. We can a little bit, we can hit away about it. That's a big problem to be chipping away at. These are things that will make a difference to that in the future. So offering better flexible working, and the way you describe that as a benefit in your flexible working application is, you know, this shows your commitment as a school or as a multi-academy trust to diversity. You know, we need to look at how we do this as a trust and as a school, and giving me in this particular scenario flexible working helps to work towards that. Some of the other benefits of having flexible leaders in position, this kind of more distributed model of leadership, it's brilliant for succession planning. So if you have an assistant head teacher who is only in 4 days a week on a 0.8 contract, who picks up their 5th day? Like, who picks up their responsibilities on that day? Are there parts of their role that can be taken out of their responsibilities and held as discrete responsibilities for someone else? Because those opportunities to do things like that, if you're a middle leader, if you're just a teacher and you're looking at trying to make your way through the leadership progression in a school, but you're not ready yet to take on a head of year, or you're not ready yet to take on a phase leader or a subject lead role, if you are given a little bit of a discrete responsibility that's been taken off someone else because they're working flexibly, that gives you the opportunity to prove yourself and to develop. And that's also something that's really important for women, and that helps women. So that opportunity to prove that you can do things, so you feel more confident in applying. But it also just means you're in a better position if someone is off, if someone leaves, if you have a job share situation. So my daughter's primary reception class at primary school has got a job share teachers. And when it was really funny when she first started, lots of the other parents in the group were like, oh, I'm not sure about this. I thought, the other class have only got one teacher. I'm not sure about us having a job share. So obviously I read the Riot Act about how great it was, but we have really seen this year how important that is. So one of my daughter's teachers has had COVID very, very badly and has been off for a long period of time. And the teacher of the other class has also been very poorly with long COVID. Different reasons, different situations, but both of those class teachers have had a lot of time out of class. Now my daughter's class has got another teacher. They've got someone who's there 3 days a week who has been there with them right from September. The other class have not had their teacher, their only teacher, for all that time. And if you think about that, not from a classroom perspective, but from a leadership perspective, if you've got 2 people doing the timetable, if you've got job sharers doing curriculum, if you've got job sharers doing teaching and learning, if you've got assessment and reporting and data split up between different people in the senior leadership team, or you've got key stage responsibilities spread out across a number of different people rather than all on one particular HOD. And what that means is if one of them leaves, if one of them is off sick, if one of them has to be off school for any reason, everyone else can fill in. More people have got those skills. So if you are looking to replace them with someone from inside the school, they're more likely to have the experience and the skills that you need within your school context to be able to do that. So it's really, it's important for lots of reasons. And one of those is it's great for succession planning. It's great for giving out responsibilities to other people and for allowing people the chance to prove themselves. And again, that's important for women. And that's important for confidence and progression through the organisation for women. Also, just what I was saying, I alluded to this slightly earlier, but people are more productive, they're more committed. There is evidence that allowing people to work flexibly makes them more productive and happier in their jobs. That's so important. Like, what does that mean in schools? That means that we get better outcomes. We get better value for money in our public spending. We get happier, more effective teachers who will get better outcomes for their students. And that's something that is just immeasurable, isn't it? That's what we're all here to do. If you force people to work full-time or nothing, some people will work nothing and we'll lose them from the sector. And then some of those people who are forced to work full-time will be really unhappy about that, really demotivated. They'll have more time off. They'll be unhappy. There'll be less good teachers because they're not feeling as committed and as passionate anymore about what they're doing because they haven't been allowed that flexibility that they've requested. Also, just from when I was the assistant head at this big London school, I did the timetable. That was one of my roles, and I loved part-time staff because it made us be able to have a much better timetable. So we didn't talk about curriculum in the same way that we do now and kind of making it a good fit for the learners and being dynamic and kind of changing it as we went through. But what it meant for me is if 1 year we had an extra economics class or an extra computing A-level class, what we used to do was get a full-time teacher and they would teach 5 or 10 hours of computing or economics, and then the rest of the time they teach maths, and they hated it. They didn't want to teach maths. And we got a full-time member of staff. We only really needed them for 5 or 10 hours a week. But flexible working within your staff teams is so helpful for better curriculum. And if you have that modelled for them higher up in terms of leadership, it's much better in terms of meeting the requirements of what you need. So you might need leadership roles that you don't know about yet. So there might be issues that come up. You might need more pastoral roles coming off of COVID and the lockdown and the impact that that's had on children. You might need someone in charge of CPD and research that you hadn't had in position before. Or you might need a leadership role that is about I don't know, curriculum specialist or someone who is better. You might need better computing provision. If you need a leader in those areas and you have to hire someone who's full-time, or you have to have someone in full-time in post doing that, and actually you only need them to specialize in this one kind of reasonably small thing or focus on an area that requires a slightly smaller timetable, if or working commitment, you do better if you can have someone who's part-time, who's specialist, than you do if you have someone who is working full-time and you're kind of filling their roles. It's cheaper and it's better, and they're more focused and they're more specialized. And that argument applies as much as it does to leaders, as it does in the classroom, as it does to subject specialists, as it does to leaders. So if you have people focusing on things, doing a better job of that one strategy or that one element of running the school, and that's something that they're really good at and they do really well, it's better to have them part-time doing that than to have someone full-time with a sort of mismatch of jobs because they're just filling up all the different roles that need doing. I'm just conscious of time. So this is moving on really now to a section about what to do if you want to work flexibly as a leader. So if you are in a position already and you want to request flexibility, you can do that if you've been working for the organisation for 26 weeks or more, and you haven't made a request within the last 12 months. So you're only allowed to make one request every year. But check your school's flexible working policy, because all schools have different policies on this. They might have something different in place. There's a consultation out from the government. I think it's closed now, but it's quite a recent consultation where they are asking what people think about changing this. So they think it should be a day one right. They're proposing that you can make more than one request within 12 months, and those kind of the impact of that on schools is going to be quite big. So their flexible working policies will have to change if those regulations are kind of approved and put forward. I would also recommend, if you're in a post and you're thinking about making a flexible working request, to speak to someone who's a sort of trusted line manager. It doesn't have to be your line manager, it can be someone else. Line managers in school are not always experts on flexible working, and I think what we find is people are often quite scared of it. So if you have no experience of flexible working and someone asks you, starts talking to you about making a flexible working request, particularly if your head isn't keen and there kind of isn't a culture of it, and it hasn't happened before, I think line managers can feel quite nervous about that and saying the right thing and not knowing what to say. But a good line manager will either be able to talk to you about it and advise you, or they'll know to go away and kind of find out more about it. But do try and talk to someone before you make the request, because it's really helpful in terms of being able to anticipate the barriers. So our 3 big tips for people who are in positions already who want to work flexibly are, first of all, to be quite flexible with what you want. So it's give and take. So it's harder for a school to say yes if you're saying I need to have 2 days a week off and they need to be Monday and Friday. If you're more flexible about which days and the arrangements, then it's easier for them to accommodate it. And when I first requested flexible working, I wanted 3 consecutive days in school. So I was going to 0.6 and I accepted a 0.6 job, and I said, I will only take this job if you can guarantee that those 3 days are consecutive days, because I thought that was my daughter was about 3 months old at this time, and I had it in my head that was very important for her that I was away for 3 days in a row, because I didn't want her getting confused about which days Mummy was home and what was going to happen. So funny when I think back to that. But they said, oh, we can't do that, but what we can do, I worked Monday, Wednesday, Thursday in that first year that I was in that job, and I was really worried about that. It wasn't what I wanted. It was great. It was much better for me. It actually worked out much better for my daughter because I was never away from her for a long period of time, and I really enjoyed going in for one day. It's actually what I do now. I do that same pattern now, so I do a Monday and a Wednesday, Thursday in school, and you never work if you have a little mini break in the middle of the week and you also have a long weekend. So really it's the best of both worlds. I had gone in with a very closed mind about that, saying I couldn't do that and that wouldn't work for me, and actually what they suggested was really good. And then last year or the year before, my school had asked me to do more hours, so they'd asked me to go from 0.6 to 0.8, and I said no. I said I want to work 3 days. 3 days is just the right balance for me at the moment, with a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and with all this flexible teacher talent stuff going on around it, I can't do more than 3 days in school. And they said, fine, okay, what about this, can you teach 0.8 worth of hours, so along with your leadership role and your time off, can you teach a 0.8 timetable but squished into 3 days? So I now work a compressed timetable where I'm only in school for 3 days. I teach as many lessons as I would teach if I was in for 4 days. So effectively all my PPA and all my management time is all put on a Tuesday, and I'm off on a Tuesday. And that's because the school saw an opportunity there to give me what I wanted. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's terrible, really, that I purport to specialize in flexible working and I wouldn't have thought of that idea. But they came back to me and we had this kind of back and forth about what I would do and what I wouldn't do. And my red lines were quite set, but I was open to listening to what they said. And I actually found that really hard at first, because I don't have any frees at school. I hardly have any free periods while I'm in school, and I found that really intense. But once I got into the rhythm of it, I've learned that it can work, and it does work, and it's great. And I'm actually going to do the same thing again next year, except they want me to go full-time and have 4 days in school. So we will see. My personal issues here. The other big thing to focus on when you're making your application, I said it earlier, but it's to outline those benefits. It's not just about you. It's not just the benefits to you. You working flexibly benefits the school and the school community as well. So don't, make sure you really emphasize that when you're making your application and putting your business case across. And then anticipate the barriers. So there are some things that you'll always be able to say, what will happen on the days when you're not there? How will your role be split up? Who will do what? You will know best. So you know best for your school what those barriers will be. So what the head's gripe is going to be, kind of what people are going to worry that your colleagues are going to worry about. And that's why that conversation with your line manager is really important, because that will help you to see what the barriers might be and think about ways to anticipate them. So we used to see all the time people say, no, you can't be a head of department and work part-time, because what about the staff briefing on a Friday? You're going to miss the staff briefing. Well, now that we do that all remotely anyway, the landscape has really changed in terms of what's possible and what's available. So COVID was a bit of a double-edged sword for flexible working, because what we were doing in COVID was not true flexible working. It was not, a positive, planned, proactive experience. It was, well, it certainly was in my house. It was all us just flying by the seat of our pants, like trying to work with my kids in tow, like not really know how to work any of the technology, and wanting to be on site and not being able to be on site. It's this kind of forced work from home. And that was really, really difficult to manage. But it has shown us that things are possible that we didn't think were possible before. The other barriers that we see quite a lot are people say, oh, but what will happen to this, the management of this aspect when you're not in school? So either that aspect is given altogether to someone else and is not part of your responsibilities anymore, or maybe someone can have some experience in overseeing that on the day that you're not in, and that's good development for them and good succession planning for the department. If you've got a really good assistant head who's really making great progression, and they're clearly gonna go up to deputy, and will they have to stay in school or not do that? If you've got people in that middle leadership level who've had experience of some parts of their job, it just makes you so much better in terms of succession planning and setting up for what will happen when that happens. So kind of twist the things that they are likely to see as negatives into positives and provide solutions for that. One of the other things that's in the government consultation about flexible working is trying to stop the burden of trying to work out what the problems are and how to solve them from being on the applicant, because actually the people who are best placed to assess how this can work and what could change to make this work are the school leaders, and they have an overview of the whole strategy and how the whole organization works. So really it shouldn't be down to the applicant having to kind of suggest solutions and work a way through this and see what could work. It should be from the top down in a proactive and strategic way. If they can see that a job design might need to change, or they could move around, or there could be an opportunity for developing someone else, that shouldn't be down really to an individual to have to do that, because school leaders are much better placed. But at the moment, in the current setup, the burden for that very much falls on the applicant, and we can help with that. We can find other people who are doing the same role as you. We can advise you on your application. Just get in touch, and that's our daily job. We are often help people to do their flexible working requests and to anticipate the barriers. But we can't, external people can't really do that for you. We can look at generic barriers and what people tend to say, but you will know what's best in your school for which problems you need to solve. Really being open-minded about that is, oh sorry, this is just a repeat of what I've just said. I've not moved my slides along. Be open-minded. Just because they don't offer a certain type of flexibility now doesn't mean that they can't. You can try something out. It is hard to be the pioneer, to be the trailblazer, but you know, give it a go, offer a review period and say, well, let's just see how it goes for a couple of terms, and then we can reassess and see if it's still working, which again can be quite nerve-wracking and quite difficult for the person in the position of coming into the role. Also just focus on the benefits. There's so many benefits for retention, recruitment, diversity, succession planning, a chance to refocus on what you really want as an organisation. So I don't know about your schools, but in the schools I've worked in, they have, you know, the structure of the SLT has been the same for years and years and years, and the responsibilities that they have and the organisation of the departments in terms of who, you know, having a key stage manager or not, and what the roles and responsibilities are, what the TLRs are, has been very, very rigid. And we tend in the education sector to not be very dynamic about that. You know, we might need to change what our focus is, we might need to change what the roles are and how they work. And actually flexible working can be a real positive for that, because it gives you a sort of, I think Emma Turner in her book, Let's Talk About Flex, calls it elasticity rather than flexibility. So it gives you opportunities for people to increase or decrease their hours depending on what's needed, and to change the focus of what you're doing based on the staff that you have and the expertise that you have. Try not to take it personally if they turn you down. It really is not you, it is them. So all of the requests that we get turned down and they come to us asking for help, it is very clear that the school culture is just anti-flexible working. It's not a reflection on the individual and them not being able to do it. It's about how the school views flexible working. So, you know, try and see it as positive that they want to keep you full time, even though it's really, really hard to see it in that way when you've had that knockback. And also just anticipate the barriers from the school's point of view. How will they phrase their problems? Like, what will they put forward as their issues? And we can help you with networks, with using like Women Ed and the MTPT project and other examples of case studies who are already working flexibly in those roles, who can hopefully show us that it can be done. And you know, the further we get you know, into the future, and the more the work of these flexible working ambassador schools starts to get across into the sector, the more we will see that it works. And once you see that it works, it becomes easier. So hopefully, you know, we won't have to have sessions like this a few years down the line, because it will be accepted that it can and does work. Obviously, there will always be individuals who are against flexible working in schools where it's really hard because of people's views, but the general landscape is changing. If you're looking to apply elsewhere, if you're looking to apply for a job at another school, either because it's just the right time or because your flexible working request has been turned down, obviously look for jobs that mention flexible working in the adverts. So the government vacancy website, you can filter for job share, you can filter for part-time, and there are lots of jobs on there that offer flexible working now. That's becoming more and more common. But you can also filter on things like TES jobs. You can filter for part-time, and that will show you the still quite limited number of jobs that are offered with flexible working. But also look out now, we have more and more vacancies in schools where the first line will say, you're open to flexible working, talk about flexible working in your interview, let us know. If you're applying for a full-time post, or a post that is not technically advertised as part-time, but you want to have some flexible working, so whether sometimes you're just applying for a full-time post that doesn't mention anything at all about flexible working in the interview, in the job advert, and sometimes you're applying for what's billed as a full-time post but says, you know, we're open to flexible working. And there are 3 different options there for when you bring up flex. So you can investigate it before you apply, you can phone the school, you can talk to them on a school visit, you can just drop them a quick email and say, I'm thinking about this, what do you think about flexible working, how will that work? And sometimes they'll show you that they're open to that, and that's great, and sometimes you'll see from that initial conversation that that is not going to work, and maybe not proceed any further with the application. But that's one option. The other is to do it during the process. So either to do it as part of like a school tour or an interview, or to do it in the any questions part of the interview. So when you get to that point where they say, is there any, are you still happy to accept the role, and are you still interested, have you got any questions, you can mention flexible working then. The third option is to wait until you're offered the role and then mention flexible working. And when we say this to school leaders, they're like, of course they should do the first, it's much better for us if they do the first. But unfortunately, outside of education, the industry advice, kind of Time Wise's advice on this and Women Ed's advice on this, is the third of those options. So the general advice is to ask for flexibility once and only once you have been offered the role. And that's really hard for people to, it's hard on the school. If they can't then accommodate it, it's hard on the individual to go through that process. It's not easy to apply for jobs. It's not easy to go through the interview process and take the time off your current school to go for them, or to go in from maternity leave through assessment processes. So if you've gone through all that and then are told you can't have flexibility, it's really not ideal. And people often don't want to do that, and they choose not to do that. But that is the kind of generic advice, is to do it once you've been appointed, because that removes the discrimination that unfortunately is still there against applicants who are wanting to work part-time or wanting to work flexibly. So if you have been offered the role, you are the best person for that job, and the school have started to imagine you in post and doing that role, and they know that you're the best person for it. And the other reason why that works in teaching and outside of teaching is because if you were the best and you want part-time and the awesome flexibility, and then the second best person was also appointable and really good, and they also wanted some flexibility, it might be that you two, as the two best applicants for the role, are able to form some kind of job share or talent partnership, as we like to call it. That's quite common in other sectors, that they will interview and they will select the best people and they can pair them up in terms of a job share. It doesn't happen really in teaching at all, and hopefully we're moving to a position where it could, but that's quite hard. And again, about this thing about being a pioneer and a trailblazer, that's quite ballsy. Like, that's quite difficult to do, isn't it, to go all the way through an application process and then say at the end, what about flexible working? And also, we absolutely see that people don't want to do that. I wouldn't have wanted to do that after my first maternity leave. I wouldn't have applied for a full-time post and then negotiated in that way, because I just wouldn't have wanted to waste my time. I wouldn't have wanted to be in a school that wasn't open to flexible working. It was really important to me when I first started working flexibly that I worked somewhere that got it and that understood it and that could help me with that. So yeah, if you're applying for a full-time post, you can do it. You can mention it before, you can mention it during the interview, or you can mention it once you're offered the role. But there might be some discrimination or not. Investigating before is a really good way to tease out whether that school's a good school for flexible working, whether that's somewhere that it is worth applying to and where you'd have a good time being. And often if they've said in their job advert, talk to us about flexible working, it's probably better to mention it beforehand rather than to leave it to the end of the application process. Yes, and then the other thing that you can do if you're looking for a new post is to do what's called a speculative application. So we've seen a lot of success with this recently, with people who've relocated, so people who've moved to a new area and they've just gone around all the local schools with a letter that says, this is me, I've got this many years experience, I've been in charge of this in schools, I've been a head of phase or a head of department for this many years, specialising in this. I'm looking for 3 days a week. Please let me know if there are any vacancies that come up. And what we've seen is schools go, oh my goodness, I would love to have this person working in my school, and this is exactly what we need. We needed a specialist in this, or we're really short on pastoral leaders, and look how much breadth of experience this person has got, let's, you know, keep them in mind, and when something comes up, let's tell them. But we are also seeing them say, oh, let's make a job, let's make a position. And I don't know if this is okay, actually, I don't know if this is legal or not, but they then advertise a post that is, you know, a 2-day-a-week literacy lead or something, with that person specifically in mind. As I'm saying this, I feel like that is not okay legally, so maybe let's edit that bit out, Antonio, I don't know. It's just really, really good way to get yourself known to the schools. And obviously you still have to go through a proper process, and you still have to apply for the job, and there has to be a vacancy, but it's a good way to get on the radar for when things do come up in those schools. And again, not something that's common in the education sector. It could be because you can't just apply for a job based on a CV, as you could in other sectors. So you will have to still go through the full application process because of safeguarding, but it is an option that's available, and that we are seeing work more and more for people who are looking for flexibility. Use your networks. So look at, we can post, we can say, you know, we have an experienced early years lead who is looking for a 3-day-a-week role or a job share in this area. And we quite often, you know, sometimes we don't get any bite for that and there's no one else interested, but we quite often then will get a few people who are also looking for something in a similar area, in a similar stage or in a similar type of school or a similar type of role, and we can put them together. And one of the things that I'm kind of most proud about our work with Flexible Teacher Talent is that 2 years ago, we had someone in Leicestershire looking for a co-headship role. So she knew she wanted to be a head teacher, she was a really experienced deputy head, but she just didn't want to do it full time. And we posted on our Twitter account, you know, we've got this person, these are her skills, she's looking for a primary school in Leicester as a head, and she wants someone to job share with. And we found someone, and they are now together, having been for 18 months the co-head teachers of a primary school. They didn't know each other before, you know, it was just our network and social media that brought them together. And that's not what happens every time we post, and quite often we don't get anything back. But there might be someone out there looking for the same thing as you, where you can share a role and do a job share. So use your networks, use them also to find examples of schools that do flexible working well, find people who do the role that you are looking to do flexibly, but also, you know your own limits and preferences. You might not want to be flexible, you might have a very set time that you can work or not work, so that option to be flexible when you put in the request is not there, or you might not want to waste your time with an application that might finish for a full-time role when they can't grant you flexibility. So it's all very much about your personal situation and what you can do. Some people are looking for a post, a very specific type of post, so a teaching and learning assistant head role, and they will only consider doing that. Other people are more open to different types of roles. So we've had speculative applications where they've said, look, my background is this and I want to do this, and the school have said, oh well, we've got an opening for a part-time kind of manager of the learning mentors, you know, would you be willing to consider that? And people have done, but your own personal situation will determine what your options are and what your limits are and what your preferences are. Yes, this is a good news bit. So there has been lots of progress. So we are seeing an increase year on year of how many part-time staff there are in leadership roles in schools. And the DfE published this data. I think the new data might be coming out quite soon, actually. So we can see that there are more part-time assistant heads in primary schools. We can see that there are more people actually at every level. So more heads, more deputy heads, more assistant heads, and more teachers who are working flexibly in schools. And these figures, they're real people, like they're from the census data, they're from the data that schools send about their workforces. So I think it's really good to know that these are not just percentage changes, these are real people who are working. It's not fully flexibly, it's just part-time, so the figures only show you who's part-time, but there are more part-time leadership roles. That is a fact, that is happening at all levels and actually in all types of schools. So the progress is good. The flexible working so the kind of research that I've been doing only on Twitter, so it's obviously not very scientific, but it's about how many flexible working requests are being accepted. Those figures are increasing year on year, and I'm going to do that again for a 2022 version to see if we have that trend continued, that more flexible working requests are being accepted. And I hope to see again a positive change in that, but it is going in the right direction. We're seeing more and more of these case studies because as time goes on, more and more people will be doing these roles flexibly in senior leadership, and will be able to prove and show that it works. I think part of the problem for schools accepting flexible working at the moment is it still seems quite new and untested. And so we're starting to get more and more evidence as people work more flexibly in senior leadership. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg situation. You know, we can't see that flexible working works until we have senior leaders working flexibly, and we can't have flexible until they're given those posts. So we are definitely moving in the right direction in terms of evidence and proof that flexible working works in schools. We're also again, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, I might have to talk to you, Antonio, about editing it out, but I'm going to say it anyway. So the DFE are also working on a piece around research and data and proving the statistics on flexible working. So we feel that we know that flexible working improves retention and decreases absences and helps with student outcomes and helps with diversity, but it's quite hard to have the proof of that, and lots of schools won't act on these things until there is proof. So we're working with the DFE and their data team to try and evidence the benefits of flexible working. The flexible working team that they have at the Department for Education are really, really great, and they're really passionate about moving this forwards. They've got some really good people on those teams, so people like Mandy Coulter, who's a HR specialist who used to work for United Learning, people like Vivian Porritt from Vivian Porritt from Women Eds, and just a whole host of people from organisations like all the teaching unions and Big Mats, and that's really, really helpful in terms of progressing that agenda for flexible working. So you can do it. It might have to be in the right school, but you can work flexibly as a leader. In terms of being in the post, there are a few things you can do. So leave loudly, make sure you don't do work you're not paid for, and just constantly review and refine it. Make sure that you are looking at changing things as roles change. I'm gonna stop banging on now for a little while and just see if anybody wants to look at their own individual situation. But I see that I've scared everybody off, actually.
You haven't. There's been a number of posts about people having to pick up the children from nursery and bits and pieces. So Flo is here. Flo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording now so